those that have begun to actually undertake this kind of digitised, decarbonised journey have found that actually their energy bills are decreasing. So it's a worthwhile investment if you know where to start. There seems to be this nervousness, it's that classic, robots are taking over our jobs, and with AI now, everyone's at risk. But actually, what we find in all of our data is where companies have introduced digital technologies into the workplace, sometimes there is displacement of those kind of lower skilled jobs, those manual tasks, but it is replacing tasks, not jobs, and actually you're creating those new jobs.
Made to Grow, the podcast for SME manufacturers, brought to you by FlowLens, the simple, affordable MRP system. Over 10 episodes, we've got a host of experienced manufacturers, industry thought leaders, and subject matter experts sharing their personal stories and professional insights to help you on your manufacturing success story. So, stay tuned and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts for a new episode every fortnight. This week, I'm sitting down with Verity Davidge, Head of Policy at Make UK, the membership organisation which supports more than 20,000 UK manufacturing companies. We discuss Make UK's manufacturing digitalisation campaign and discuss the impact digital transformation can have on both your carbon footprint and your bottom line. We also discuss a few of the biggest trends that hit the manufacturing sector, from the skills and labour shortage to supply chain disruptions and what SMEs can do to make a difference without waiting years for payback. Let's get started. Welcome, Verity, to the Made to Grow podcast. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
It'd be great if you could give our listeners a quick overview of Make UK. Not everyone maybe is familiar with it, and the role that you play, which is judging from the LinkedIn presence and a lot of the reports and material that you produce, heavily engaged in the future of manufacturing and where UK manufacturing could be, with the right support. So be keen just to understand more about that and what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Make UK, we represent around 20,000 manufacturing and engineering companies across England and Wales. And our job is to be the voice of manufacturing, to champion manufacturing to government, to the media, and indeed to the public. And really it's our ambition to help create an environment of which manufacturers can grow and they can thrive. So my job as Director of Policy is to take all of the insight and intelligence that we hear from our members, the challenges and opportunities they face, and articulate that to government to say, actually, these are the sort of policy levers that you could use to create that great business environment so that the UK is a great place to do manufacturing.
And in terms of SMEs in particular, you've recently published the Digitalise to Decarbonise report, which has a lot of interesting information about what manufacturers are doing, and about 44%, I think, are on somewhere on the journey, which is great. But obviously, there's more to join in. I'd be keen to understand, particularly for the sort of smaller manufacturers, who have had a lot thrown at them over the last few years. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges and barriers that are presented in the race to net zero?
So you're absolutely right. We've gone through quite a period of instability. We are living in a post-pandemic Brexit era, and for manufacturers that's been particularly challenging, and the challenges haven't really stopped. So if we think about it at the moment, lots of small manufacturers are facing real challenges with costs. They could be labour costs, they could be input costs, but increasingly they're talking about energy costs. So I think they probably peaked last year. We've seen a little bit of a dip, but for many companies, they've had to take a lot of mitigating action to actually just reduce that cost of energy impact on their business. They haven't been always able to rely on government support. So what we've seen in the past 12 months is quite a shift of companies actually looking at what they can do within their businesses, how they can decarbonise their processes to essentially reduce energy consumption and therefore their energy bills. And one of the best ways that actually they've been able to do this is through the use of digital technologies. Now, you have some of the larger businesses that perhaps have been doing this for some time, and some of the smaller businesses that it's probably just the beginning of their journey. But those that have begun to actually undertake this kind of digitised, decarbonised journey have found that actually their energy bills are decreasing. So it's a worthwhile investment if you know where to start, how to kind of implement the strategy, and actually how to maximise what that strategy is within your business. So I think we've seen a real shift. I think if you'd asked us 12 months ago how many companies, particularly small businesses, were thinking about this, I think it would be pretty low down on the priority list. But because energy costs have become such a challenge, actually in a way, companies have to start thinking about what they can do for themselves.
Well, one place that listeners might think about looking at is actually the Smart Manufacturing Data Hub, which is a sort of digital catapult Innovate UK offshoot, and one of their projects is actually looking at energy consumption, and there's some support there for manufacturers to dip their toe in the water, understand how they can measure their current consumption, and then figure out ways to reduce it. One of the areas, we find this ourselves because we work with small manufacturers all the time, and it's sort of capacity to do anything, and skills is another big area where actually I think sometimes people overthink the skills that they need to adopt certain technologies. If they're used to using email, Facebook, YouTube, Excel, a lot of things that they use day to day. Other tech like FlowLens and whatnot, it's not that much more daunting. But how do you see government addressing the kind of green and digital skills gap in manufacturing, particularly given there's more than 70,000 vacancies that just seems to be growing day by day?
So always the two biggest barriers to a lot of investments that companies want to make, including digitalising their process, comes back to costs and skills. And as you mentioned, we've gone from a skills crisis to also just a general labour shortage where there just simply aren't enough people. So whilst, as you mentioned, we're still at around kind of 74,000 live vacancies. It's dropped from about 95,000 towards the end of the year. But in terms of how many vacancies are open per 100, it's still about, I think, 3.1. That's about double the amount we were pre-pandemic. So we've always had quite a significant skills gap in manufacturing, but now we have kind of a people shortage as well. I think that really puts a focus on that need to upskill and retrain the existing workforce. We can continue to bring in, new talent through apprentices and graduates, and that's really important. But it's probably not going to do a kind of a like-for-like replacement, particularly if we think of in manufacturing, it's like the ageing demographic, more and more people retiring. We saw the great retirement during the pandemic. We lost a lot of labour from the sector. I don't think they're going to be enticed back anytime soon. So there needs to be this focus on upskilling and reskilling. And I think for us, and as our role of Make UK, that's where we're really pushing government to fill the gap, because actually there's not huge amounts of support to help reskill and upskill the current labour force. For manufacturers, they have to put their hands in their pockets and pay for it themselves. Now, that's not to say that they won't invest in training. Actually, manufacturers invest significantly in people and training. Whenever we have, recessions, for example, manufacturers hold on to people and they don't actually invest in capital. Their priority is always their people. Mm-hmm. But actually, right now, when there are such intense cost pressures, that can be quite a difficult commitment. So I think it is in part just looking at your current labour force and looking for that potential, because actually sometimes it just might need a small bit of upskilling and reskilling. If you are introducing robotics and cobotics into the workplace, it might not be that you need a 4-year-long apprenticeship programme. It might be that you need kind of short bursts of modular training, and that does exist. It's about going out there and looking for the provision that works for you. And I think that's a really important point, that sometimes we get so focused on kind of the more traditional forms of training, which are important, but if we want to kind of live in the here and now and we look at our existing workforce, where is that potentially untapped potential? Do you have people in your business that have been there for some time that actually want to grow and progress? And actually digitalisation provides that perfect opportunity, because you are upskilling people, you are giving them better jobs, and you're probably going to end up giving them a better wage as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the number of businesses that we help where we're releasing people from kind of drudgery of admin, because, a lot of SMEs have grown up around, spreadsheets or maybe some legacy systems, and they just accept that as the norm. The getting the product out the door and serving the customer well is kind of the primary mission. And the kind of it's sort of not seeing the wood for the trees as far as the kind of systems that they have in place, where it's either like data that's duplicated across different departments in the business, or processes that are carried out because somebody thought it was a good idea 10 years ago to capture some information or do something, and then never question why it's done or what's the information actually used for. So we find that a lot of businesses have been able to multi-skill their people, because they can take by automating processes like sales order processing, purchasing, stock management, planning. Those are time-consuming tasks, and those people then, as you say, are released to do more valuable work. And actually, the systems allow them to do more work, but it's just, and it's also higher value. So I think there's a sort of a leap of faith sometimes whenever manufacturers tend to be comfortable in the way they do things, and maybe don't always question them. But whenever you look at the savings that are potentially there, as well as just this ongoing headache of the lack of supply of labour, something's going to have to change.
And I think that's the point, that you can also start small on your kind of digital journey, that you don't have to suddenly automate your entire factory. Actually, you can start at the back office, and sometimes that's what we see a lot of small businesses focus on, the kind of payroll, invoicing, HR, admin, all of that area before they're moving on to the kind of the factory floor itself. And I think that actually that gives manufacturers kind of that bit of space to grow and learn and understand what works well. Because then I think when you move on to the kind of factory floor, that's when you've got to really look at your employee engagement as well. You need buy-in from the shop floor all the way to the boardroom. You need the kind of leadership and management. You need that kind of that culture to understand that this is actually good for the business and it's good for our employees. Because again, there seems to be this nervousness. It's that classic, robots are taking over our jobs, and with AI now, everyone's at risk. But actually, what we find in all of our data is where companies have introduced digital technologies into the workplace, sometimes there is displacement of those kind of lower skill jobs, those manual tasks, but it is replacing tasks, not jobs, and actually you're creating those new jobs, which in a way brings you whole back to that skills piece. Because if you make the decision to invest in robotics and cobotics, you may suddenly need a robotics engineer to service that robot. So you need to make sure that before you're making these investments, that you're thinking about the whole strategy, and that goes back to your people, bringing your people with you on that journey, but also upskilling and reskilling them, or maybe bringing in new talent so that you can really kind of capitalise on those investments.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by FlowLens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with FlowLens. Now, back to the interview. And what kind of recommendations are you putting to government then to enhance particularly on the skills side of things? What the sort of supports that are out there are, as you said, are kind of limited, and don't necessarily need to be full-blown 4-year apprenticeships. But what kind of things do you see as being practical, but best served by additional government support?
So I think there's always the two strands. There is that support with investing in digitalisation to decarbonise, and then there is the kind of the skill side as well. So on how to really kind of encourage further digitalisation, we have called for the programme Made Smarter to be rolled out across the country. It was first piloted in the Northwest. It was then rolled out to regions in the Midlands and Yorkshire and Humber, but it still remains a postcode lottery. And all of our research and data shows that companies where Made Smarter has been implemented and embedded has actually led to companies being far further on their digital journey. So in a way, the evidence speaks for itself. We're really hoping that's something that the government and in particular Chancellor will pick up on ahead of the autumn statement. I think there's other things that government could do around the R&D tax relief scheme, for example. So again, this is one of the probably mostly used form of kind of government support for manufacturers. It's very much become embedded. They understand how to use it. It's very technical, but they've managed to work their way through it, perhaps with a little bit of outside help. But actually, if you could expand that to include kind of capital expenditure for plant and machinery, that would go a long way to really helping companies think about how they can move forward. I think on the skills side, and that's for us our kind of biggest focus at the moment, I think if we were to say to kind of tweak things around the edges, we would be calling for, and we are calling for government to create an employer retraining fund. So using the underspent levy, which we do know exists, to actually give it back to employers so that they can use it on upskilling and reskilling. So it doesn't have to be dedicated to apprenticeships, but fills that gap that we were talking about in provision. I think long term, we would want to see a root and branch review of the apprenticeship levy. The purpose of it, the concept of it, to invest more in apprenticeships, great. But actually, if you look at the figures, you see falling numbers of apprenticeships, you see apprentices not finishing their apprenticeships, you see lower quality. All the metrics suggest that actually it's not quite working. We've never come to a point to say scrap it and start again. We think there is a place for really encouraging apprenticeships, particularly in our sector, but we need to make it work for the champions of apprenticeships, which we see as manufacturers, and in particular small manufacturers. I don't think I ever go and visit a Make UK member and ask in the room if they offer apprenticeships, and no one puts their hand up. Normally it's the MD or chair telling me they used to be a former apprentice as well. So it's really ingrained in the sector. It's just how do we make the most of what is available. And I think this focus on the need to upskill and reskill the domestic labour market is more than important than ever, because we can't rely on labour from overseas. It is far more difficult to even recruit from the EU now, and actually for a lot of companies that's always a last resort. It's time consuming, it's costly. They want to recruit the domestic labour market, but we need to give them tools to be able to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I hear from our customers about the frustrations of the apprenticeship levy and the scheme, and you go through a lot of pain to get somebody finally recruited, and then the attrition rate isn't great. So it's probably a cultural thing as well, where those kind of jobs need to be championed as a great career, and not and worth the effort, rather than going and working in McDonald's, as one of my previous guests lamented about.
Yeah, and one of the things it's our job to do at Make UK is to overcome the perceptions of manufacturing. We've got a great story to tell. Actually, wages are 13% higher than the economy average. We export more than any other sector. We invest in large amounts of R&D. We still have this massive image problem. We are on the 28th of September hosting National Manufacturing Day. It's our second year that we've been doing it, and we call on all of our members to open their doors to local communities, young people, and just show them inside the factory, show them what they've got to offer, and really kind of look at that perception versus reality. We've recently surveyed the great British public, and we'll be publishing that information later in the year, and it is just so interesting still to see how there is still a generational divide and a gender divide, and even through the kind of pandemic and all the great work we've done, there is still work to do to show that there is not just a job in our sector, there is a lifelong career, and one that can actually change and you can progress if you kind of not even take the risk, but just kind of open your mind to see what's actually inside that local factory, no doubt, on your doorstep.
Yeah, because I think there's still a bit of a perception that we don't do manufacturing anymore, apart from maybe making Land Rovers, and you know. So obviously the work you're doing is vital for that. I suppose it's a crystal ball question, but with the looming potential change in government, is there any idea of how kind of approach your attitudes towards manufacturing might shift? Because let's face it, the Conservatives have had long enough to kind of set out their stall, and they don't really seem to have bought into that the potential. I think, I can't remember the exact figures, but I think you quoted even a 5% uplift in manufacturing revenue would bring like nearly 200 billion of value to the UK economy. It seems like a no-brainer to me.
If you increase the GDP from 10 to 15% for manufacturing, you'd create like just under 150 billion to the economy.
150,
and in regions where government tells us they want to level up, it's the perfect opportunity to really invest in manufacturing. I think in the past 12 months we've sort of seen a little bit more current government commitment to manufacturing. The Chancellor has his 5 strategic growth sectors, one of which is advanced manufacturing. If you ignore the word advanced, it's a really good thing. I think the slight frustration is that advanced manufacturing really narrows it down, and our argument has always been, well, actually every manufacturer and every manufacturing sector could be advanced if actually you helped it along the way. Things like increasing digitalisation to improve productivity, making sure they have the kind of the skills and the labour that they need. So we've slightly seen a bit of a change in direction on that, and we are hopeful that given it is one of the Chancellor's strategic growth sectors, we might get a bit more support come autumn on how actually he's going to empower the sector to grow and really be the engine of economic growth we know it is. I think in terms of looming election, possible change in government, I think one of the major positives we see from the Labour Party is a commitment to an industrial strategy. That is our biggest campaign. 99% of manufacturers say they want an industrial strategy. Over half say they don't feel there's ever been a long-term, robust vision for manufacturing. And they are increasingly pointing to other countries who they say are better nations to do manufacturing than here in the UK. They always point to Germany, increasingly France, and of course, most recently, the US, because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we are at a competitive disadvantage by not having an industrial strategy here in the UK. And I think what we've seen from the Shadow Secretary of State, Johnny Reynolds, is very much a firm commitment to introduce an industrial strategy. It would be our absolute ambition for every political manifesto that is published in the autumn to make a commitment to a long-term industrial strategy of some form. In a way, call it what you want, but we do need a long-term plan that isn't subject to kind of political chop and change, because nowadays it isn't even a changing government itself that changes policy. It's changes to machinery of government or a changing chancellor. And without that longevity, manufacturers, and in particular small manufacturers, won't have the confidence to make those investments that actually we really need to see right now.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, that the competitive landscape is shifting, and obviously with Brexit as well, that kind of trade and the kind of structural elements as well, the dynamics are changing. So there's a lot that's working against the sector. So we kind of need somebody to pick up the baton and at least they've got a nice blueprint from Make UK to.
Yeah, if you'd like an industrial strategy, we have one. We have a plan. In lieu of government presenting something, we have put a framework together which we think is more of a modern industrial strategy. Interestingly, but perhaps unsurprising, we did one 10 years ago. It pretty much looks the same. It's actually just this reference to moving towards a digital and green economy that's almost made it into again the 2023, perhaps, which we didn't see 10 years ago. But I would also say that, if anything, through the last few years, what we have also seen from manufacturers is their absolute resilience. So we have learned to become resilient through the pandemic, resilient through the changes from Brexit, that I think manufacturers will always keep going. What we want to see is that recognition from this government and any future government that actually there is real value in supporting the sector, and there is far more that government could do in order to make the sector really thrive and go from what we are now kind of the 8th manufacturing nation into the world to the 7th. Like, what an ambition to be. Number 7 is currently Italy. It's quite a big lag between 7th and 8th, so we've got a lot of catch up to do. Yeah, but we could do it.
Yeah, I know. I think we do need a kind of a uniting vision like that, because it's the amount of innovation and I suppose advanced technology. It might not be advanced manufacturing, but the kind of high tech stuff that's coming out of our manufacturers is worthy of helping take us there. I just wanted to touch briefly before we wrap up on the kind of supply chain side of things, because obviously that's another factor that has been contributing to manufacturers' growing resilience over the last few years. How do you see that evolving in the next while?
It feels like supply chain disruption or volatility has become the norm. We've moved from a kind of just-in-time model to a just-in-case model, and actually it feels like it's here to stay, and that's really put supply chain strategies under the microscope for a lot of UK manufacturers. We've seen a lot of changes in deployment of supply chain strategies in the past couple of years. We've seen big shifts to reshoring, which is actually a potential great British success story if we can make it work. I think there's a big challenge of turning reshoring ambition into reshoring reality. We need to make sure that if we are reshoring, then actually we are creating that business environment that actually makes those investments come here to stay. We've seen a bit of a move to onshoring, so actually kind of just moving supply chains a little bit closer to home, balancing that kind of geography and cost and location. Interestingly, we've seen a big pick up in Turkey as a place to do manufacturing, so just kind of creeping towards the UK, but perhaps not quite close to home, and just kind of diversifying the supply chain. So we've seen lots of companies increasing their number of suppliers in order to just spread the risk, understanding that they have suffered from supply chain vulnerabilities and they can't afford to do so in the future. So really, I feel like the word supply chains have been almost sort of our buzzwords of the last couple of years. It's really become under the spotlight. And again, there's lots of things that that manufacturers are doing themselves. They probably don't have support from government in this space, and arguably there's not really a role for government in this space. But it can also go back to digital technologies, because a lot around supply chain strategies is around monitoring. And to monitor, you need the right digital technologies and tools to be able to do so. Worryingly, a lot of manufacturers still only monitor, one up, one down. And actually, we know that supply chains are long and they're complex. And actually, you need a far kind of broader look of your supply chain in order to deploy those strategies successfully.
That's another project that we're involved with, is the Digital Supply Chain Hub. Actually, we just started a project with them to look at total cost modelling for SMEs, and it's very much focused on that. Going beyond the basics of lead time and cost to looking at local supply versus international supply, and the carbon consequences of that, as well as the sort of cost and security element of it. So it's great to see that that's a focus for Digital Catapult, Digital Supply Chain Hub coming out of Innovate UK. So just to kind of wrap up, I always like to ask my guests if they leave our listeners with one kind of action or piece of advice. You obviously Make UK is a brilliant organisation representing the interests of our sector. So just keen to know what you would leave our listeners with.
I think that if we almost kind of go back to the start and think about energy costs being the big issues of the day and digitalisation being a potential solution to that problem, is, don't fear taking the first step, because actually there's probably a lot of information, advice, and guidance out there if you just take the time to go and look for it. You've mentioned some great programs. We talk about Made Smarter, engaging with the catapult. All of those programs are there to help you and actually to help your business in a very kind of tailored and specific way. I think it can get overwhelming when you start to look at, what funding is available, for example. We've got a bit of a cheat sheet. When we published our Decarbonising Manufacturing report last year, we took all of the funding and initiatives and programs and grants and support, put them all together and actually set up what it is, what criteria you have to meet, and what outcome you can get from that. So when there's a gap, when we see a bit of a gap in the government doesn't provide, we try to provide it. So things like that take the time to look at. And I think there's the kind of final aspect of that is think through the return on investment, because a lot of the time I think we're assuming that these investments are long term, 5 to 10 years. All of our work on investing in green technology, for example, suggests that the payback is in 3 years. And if we look at the work we've done on Digitalize to Decarbonise, actually some companies reported between kind of 10 to 50 to £100,000 cost savings on energy. So if that's not enough to kind of entice you, I don't know what is.
Brilliant. Get involved. Where can we download the cheat sheet?
It's on our website at makeuk.org, and you go to Decarbonising Manufacturing. If you just scroll down to the bottom, you will see it at the end.
Cool. And we'll include your LinkedIn profile. Your updates are always fascinating, full of fascinating figures and insights. So we will include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. Well, Verity, I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I've learned a lot myself. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks again to Verity for joining us today. The need for a proper government strategy on manufacturing is clear, and it's great that Make UK are campaigning loudly and convincingly for a new approach. If you're not already a member, what are you waiting for? Next time, I'll be talking to Stephen Barr of Edge Digital Consulting. Stephen and his colleagues work with manufacturing businesses who are embarking on their digital transformation journey. We'll be discussing how manufacturers can assess their own readiness for transformation and create a manageable roadmap for change. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode, and if you found it useful, please consider rating and reviewing us on your podcast platform of choice, and of course, share it with friends and colleagues. Till next time.